kind of went a little bit unexpected today. We didn't expect to hear a high school football game from across the street.
Yep.
I just suddenly realized that there is a slight drip from the faucet in the kitchen, but I'm hoping it's going to be quiet enough.
I feel like it has to be quiet enough.
Uh-huh.
We're recording 2 hours late because it's Friday night and there was a high school football game. So there was a drumming and screaming and a loudspeaker, and somebody got honor roll.
Mm-hmm.
So good for them. Congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we set everything up and had a couple technical difficulties, but we should be about ready to go. The cat has been napping for some time, so that means that she'll probably wake up right when we're at the 1 hour mark, I imagine.
Mm-hmm. And then she'll play with the tablecloth.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, do you want to talk about our ghost story from this week?
Okay.
Like our personal ghost story?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell it?
No, you tell it. I think
Okay.
you'll tell it better.
So Peter was in the living room editing, and I walked in and we were talking about something completely unrelated, and he suddenly just looks behind me and goes, "What does that writing on the couch say?" There's no writing on our couch. It's solid blue. So I turn around, and etched into the back of our couch are letters.
But they don't look like regular
They're
letters.
backwards. They're backwards
so
letters.
So you can't read what it says. And
So we're freaking out, going, how in the world did this get here? And suddenly we realize that it's the imprint from the back of Peter's shirt. So we were not haunted. Peter was just wearing a shirt from like middle school with like that pop out paint on it.
Yeah, that shiny paint that you put on shirts to write letters.
And it imprinted his own name into the back of the couch, and we could not read his name backwards. So we were just like, oh no, a ghost.
Mm-hmm. But we can now officially say this one has been debunked, as they say on the Ghost Hunter shows. Things have been moving along. We mentioned that we were talking about London last week. However, I guess you didn't want to spoil your part for me, so all I knew was that your story was taking place during the 19th century in London.
Yes.
Specifically, I think it was was it the mid to late 19th century?
It's debatable. Once we get into it, you'll see.
Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, which is probably everyone, because anyone who's listening, I'm sure, is still getting to know me, London is my favorite city. I really like going there every time. I don't get to visit there enough. And when I was a little kid, I loved trains, which means that when I was a kid and I visited London, my favorite thing to do was just to ride around on the underground there.
Your aunts and uncles were like, why won't Peter visit us? And they're just like, we just left him on the train.
Now, as an adult, I'm sure people are probably like, why would that kid like a train? It's just crowded and full of people and smells bad and it's loud and it's underground. But when you're a kid, you get entertained by other things. So yeah, I'm talking about the London Underground this time because it is the world's oldest underground subway system, and it was constructed during the 19th century. So I figured broad time scale, I was likely to hit roughly something that happened around the same time as yours.
Excellent.
So I'm going to start out with a few quick facts that I got I've stolen these from the website Mental Floss.
Oh, I've got them on my sources for this one too.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Usually...
So there's our crossover. This episode is unofficially brought to you by Mental Floss. They are in no way sponsoring us. I'm sorry, Mental Floss.
If you'd like to, though.
But also don't sue us. Thank you for your research, Mental Floss. Mental Floss.
Yeah, usually I don't that. This is the first time that I've ever referenced them. So first off, the majority of the London Underground is, of course, not underground. Most of the rest of it is surface level. Certain parts, newer parts like the Docklands Light Railway, a lot of that will be above ground. Each one of these trains on the system travels about 114,000 miles per year.
I can't fathom that many miles. that is a lot of miles.
So the longest distance between adjacent stations, though, is only 3.9 miles. So most of the stations are quite close together. And the shortest distance is 948 feet. That's between Leicester Square and Covent Garden. It has over 1 billion passengers per year.
Again, I can't fathom that many people.
The busiest station is Waterloo, which is also the busiest train station in the United Kingdom as well. It also has the most number of platforms of any train station in the UK.
Where's Waterloo?
So Waterloo is on the south side of the river.
Please use a different. Tell me in another way.
Okay. When we went and we were at Westminster at the House of Parliament, and we walked across that bridge going towards the London Eye.
Yes.
Had we kept going on that side of the river, a few blocks further, we would have hit Waterloo.
Okay.
Waterloo's quite close to London Eye.
Okay. So the busiest station is near the London Eye and Big Ben.
Yes, and it's on the south side of the river from most of London's.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a river involved.
An estimated 500,000 mice live in the tunnels.
Aww. That's so many mice. Oh, babies.
And apparently the mosquitoes that live in the underground...
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, the mosquitoes...
There are mosquitoes?
Yeah, the mosquitoes that live in the tunnels underground are apparently a slightly different breed, and apparently they're slightly more aggressive than their above-ground counterparts.
What? So they're just breeding demon mosquitoes over there?
Apparently, yeah, it's
just waiting to, like...
It's
fester up out of the ground and take over the UK. What?
Remember H.G. Wells' story about the time traveler and he goes to the future?
They were mosquitoes?
Those are people that live underground. Yeah, that's just our future, but it's mosquitoes.
I thought Outer Banks mosquitoes were aggressive enough. Thank you. How do they compare to? Like all above ground mosquitoes?
I don't know.
Or just mosquitoes in the UK? Because I didn't even notice mosquitoes in the UK.
No, they're not nearly as aggressive as they are in the United States.
I remember when your family came over in September one year, and they were like, it'll be great, let's have our like picnic outside of our Airbnb. And I'm like, are you sure? This doesn't seem like a good idea. 15 minutes into the meal, we were scrambling to get back in because the mosquitoes of Durham, North Carolina were that aggressive.
And if they had come in the springtime, they would have found out how bad the pollen is in Durham. You didn't happen to pick a ghost story about the London Underground, did you?
No.
Oh,
Are you going to tell me a ghost story?
No, I'm not going to tell you a full ghost story. Maybe it'll be a fun one for later. But supposedly there are several apparitions that appear on the London Underground, including the faceless woman at Beacon Tree Station.
No.
The Toothy Man of Channel C Depot.
The Toothy Man?
The Toothy Man.
Toothy Man.
According to Mental Floss.
Is he a mosquito?
He is the lord of the mosquitoes.
What does the Toothy Man do?
Apparently has teeth. It'd be dreadful irony if he didn't. And then also apparently there is a screaming specter of Farringdon Station.
Okay, that's not as bad as the Toothy Man. The screaming specter of Barrington Station. Okay,
Okay, no.
I'm sorry, I'm so stuck on the Toothy Man. We have to stop. I need to know everything about the Toothy Man.
Shall I pull up the interwebs?
No, we'll have to figure out the Toothy Man later.
Okay.
Ooh.
So the average Londoner will spend on average 11 and a half days of their time on the underground each year.
With all those mosquitoes and the Toothy Man.
But I feel like about the same can probably be said for the average American, the amount of time they spend sitting in traffic on the freeway commuting to work each day.
All of it sucks. Let's normalize working from home.
But if people didn't have to commute, how would they listen to as many podcasts?
I listen to podcasts while I do my makeup, so
That's true.
I got laid off and I'm still caught up on all my podcasts, so
Okay.
I don't know what the finger gun thing I just did was. I apologize.
So the fastest trains can go up 60 miles an hour, which is, I mean, it's not high-speed rail, but decently fast. The deepest station in the network is 200 feet below street level.
Below sea level.
I almost said sea level, but then again, also, a lot of London is pretty much at sea level anyway. However, this is Hampstead on the Northern Line, which, do you remember when we went to Hampstead when we were there?
Yes.
Did we go up the stairs at that station?
I don't remember.
Okay, I went up the stairs when I was there by myself, and it is an incredibly long staircase.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a 200-foot staircase.
Excellent. If we did it, I blocked it out because trauma. I was also sick at that point in our trip.
So in 1969, apparently Queen Elizabeth II drove one of the Victoria Line trains from Green Park to Oxford Circus.
Oh, that's fun.
To in commemoration of the line's opening. The first escalator they tried to build on the underground was in 1911 at Earl's Court. However, 4 years before that one, they tried to build a spiral escalator at Holloway Road Station.
Spiral escalator. This is horrible. This is so much scarier than my story. This is awful.
And
Spiral escalator.
it didn't work.
No.
It was a fail. It did not work.
What happened?
It only lasted for a day of testing, and they never brought it into public use because it was a hazard.
Okay. Escalators are terrifying, man. One of my most vivid childhood memories is my grandfather falling down an escalator in the Crabtree Valley Mall in Raleigh, North Carolina. That's one of my most vivid memories as a child. I don't remember which parent I was with, but I had gotten ahead. So all we could do was keep riding to the top of the escalator and then just watch from the second level because we couldn't get back down as rescuers came to help him. He was fine, but I have a healthy respect for escalators. And a spiral escalator is an abomination.
So the longest escalator on the underground is actually 200 feet. It's an Angel, which is on the Northern Line. Apparently, Jerry Springer was born at Highgate Station.
What?
Which...
So random. In the station?
Uh-huh. So he was actually born during World War II when they were being used as air raid shelters.
So he was born during an air raid?
Yeah, he was born when London was being bombed by the Luftwaffe.
Oh. Oof.
Which my mom used to have her aunt actually stayed in London and had to shelter in London during the air raids. We used to have a couch that she slept on. I don't know what happened to that. That's a random tangent. And of course, it was commonly used as an air raid shelter during World War II, even though it wasn't supposed to be, but people did anyway, and the government didn't really do much to stop them. And
why wasn't it supposed to be? That seems like a pretty safe place to go.
Well, it's got electrified rail and various safety. Plus, people would be sheltering down where the tracks were themselves, and that's not really safe to get in.
Okay.
Yeah, they have pictures of people sheltering down there. So also the London Underground map, which kind of became the blueprint for subway maps around the world. Except for the New York subway, they kept theirs with a geographically accurate map, which is confusing to go there and see all the lines jumbled together. But London has its schematic map where all the stations, they try to place them evenly apart. And the man who designed it in 1933, Harry Beck, he was basing it off of diagrams that they would use for circuit boards. However, the department that was accepting suggestions for new maps thought that his wasn't good because it didn't show above ground features, and so they only offered to pay him $15 for his work.
Rude.
Yep. And now that's the map that's the way that like all transit maps get made nowadays.
Well, that's tragic.
Mm-hmm. So like I was saying earlier, London Underground is the oldest underground rapid transit system in the world. It was built in the 19th century. The train itself was developed several years earlier, but also in England. There were early examples of steam engines that were developed in France. And at this time, there was, I guess there still is, a lot of corporate espionage going on with people stealing each other's patents. So sometimes it gets fishy trying to figure out who developed what first, because a lot of times ideas would get stolen by different countries, and different governments would pay people to go to different countries and steal ideas, and that still happens today. But
fun. What a high-stakes world.
So a man named William Murdoch is often credited with developing the first patent for a steam carriage in 1784.
Jeez. Okay.
So, but his did not run on rails, so his was like a carriage that was supposed to be able to be driven on a road.
It's a car. He designed a car.
Steam-powered car, essentially.
Okay. It was a car. It was the first car.
Yeah, in 1784. And so he had a neighbor. So in 1802, his neighbor, a man named Richard Trevithick, designed and built the first steam locomotive to run on smooth rails. His did not have a name.
So he was just like peeking over his picket fence at William.
Yeah.
And was like,
pretty much.
That's a lovely like steam-powered carriage. I know how to make this better.
So William Murdoch was, and a slight side story, he was actually really interested in this technology, but the company he worked for was worried that if he went too far down that road that he might leave them, and I guess they thought he was a good employee, so they encouraged him to just not pursue it, and they told him it wasn't going anywhere. So William Murdoch almost made the first train, but he was convinced not to, and his neighbor, Richard, then proceeded to instead.
I have a lot of feelings about that story. There's a lot of gaslighting involved in that. You know what? And I bet they didn't even give him a raise.
People, I'm sure, will correct me. That is an oversimplification of what actually happened.
They weren't just like, hey, here's some extra money to stay here. Here's some good benefits. Just like, your idea kind of sucks, man. You will not succeed outside of this.
So the first ones they had looked quite different. We can upload pictures of this. This picture right here is actually the oldest surviving steam train that they have in the world. It's called Locomotion Number 1. And interestingly enough, there was a controversy around this recently because...
It wasn't that, like, fucking Dick stole it from William?
Well, it does have to do with some kind of alleged theft going on. It was been in a museum in Darlington for a long time.
Where's Darlington? Describe it to me like I'm not from England.
Darlington is north of Leeds, south of Newcastle upon Tyne. It's in north of England, Yorkshire area.
Okay.
So in the last year, the owners of the National Railway Museum wanted to move it 9 miles away to Shildon, and apparently that was a huge controversy, this 9-mile move to Shildon. And it eventually this very year, 2021, they have agreed that it's most of the time going to be in Shildon, except it will go back to Darlington every so often.
Okay, so they now have joint custody of
the... They now have joint custody.
Great. That's what a 163-year-old, like, steam engine needs.
Yeah, people felt very strongly about it. As I was reading news articles, the words cultural vandalism got thrown out. So people in Darlington feel quite strongly. And I mean, that is kind of a cool piece of history.
Yeah,
and
okay.
So the first commercially successful steam locomotive was built in 1812. and it was on the Middleton Railway in Leeds, which is the oldest continuous working railway in the world, which, like I said, this was the train was built in 1812. However, like many of these railways, it started out as a wagon way. In this particular one started in 1758, and horses were just carrying carts following along rail tracks. And then when steam engines were developed, they just put these in front of the carts. And then this was followed by the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, which was the first inner-city railway in the world. And it was opened in 1830 between Liverpool and Manchester, of course, as the name would indicate. It had a lot of firsts. It was the first to be entirely double-track through its entire length. It was the first to have a signaling system. It was the first to be fully timetabled and the first to carry mail.
Okay.
It was designed by a man named Mr. George Stephenson.
Oh, sorry, I just had
Does that connect to
a
something?
wild recovered memory.
Does that connect to something?
Not really. I had a world history teacher in high school who would get a little zany sometimes, and he would start making connections for people in the class based on historical figures.
And he connected you to this
Yeah,
person?
one time he called me George Stevenson, and everyone just looked at him like, what the fuck? And then he was just like, trains. I was like, okay, yeah, that's the coolest thing my name can do, thank you.
Actually, the Stevenson was the reason that I thought to say the name. Otherwise, most of these names I've just not been mentioning.
What the name that
Your history teacher
Mr.
gave me.
Dinkenor felt the need to say the name too. I think he was also from the UK, which I guess is why he knows who George Stephenson is. That story's the only reason I know who George Stephenson is. My maiden name is Stevenson. I feel like I haven't said that.
So, very soon afterwards, new railways started popping up all across England, and they were all privately owned and operated by different companies. You had the Grand Junction Railway, the London Birmingham Railway, the Manchester Birmingham Railway, and the London and North Western Railway were some of the earliest. By the first half of the 19th century, London had 7 train stations around its core, which, of course, you go there today and there's multiple train stations all around town because no one at the time had the foresight to say we should just have one train station in our city. But most cities, of course, try to just have one or fewer, or as few as possible train stations. The problem with all the railway termini in central London was that it was causing huge congestion for the roads. People would have to get off their train. They'd have to, take an omnibus or cart or cab across town. And as early as the 1830s, people were already trying to figure out a way to connect all these train stations in central London. So in 1854, the Metropolitan Railway, which was known as the Met often at the time, and whose name survives today as the Metropolitan Line in the London Underground system, was formed, and it was given permission to build an underground line. It was estimated the cost of £1 million at the time. However, it was delayed because the Crimean War, and it wasn't able to start construction until March of 1860. This was the first time they tried building an underground railway, and they did it with cut and cover method, where that they would dig up the street, put the train line in, and then rebuild the street over top. So it was built with this method from Paddington Station to King's Cross Station, and then tunneled under the River Fleet, which had at this time been buried under Fleet Street, and the river was buried underneath Fleet Street.
Okay.
And then
Cue Sweeney Todd sing along.
And from there went to near where the meat market Smithfield was located. It was 3.75 miles long. And it opened to the public in 1863 using steam trains carrying wooden carriages underground. Here's a picture.
I think of subways as something very modern. I never think of them existing like in the 19th century. That's just kind of wild to me.
I also just imagine people talk about how polluted that subway air is now.
Oh.
Like, I just wonder. I mean, I know at the time London in general was very polluted, so being anywhere in London and breathing the air wasn't good for your health. But yeah, I'm also just imagining being stuck in a tunnel.
Jeez.
With a steam train pulling you around.
You want to take the underground? No. No, I don't.
On opening day, it carried 38,000 passengers. It was
on opening day?
It was such a novelty at the time. People wanted to ride on a train underground. And yeah, it was so popular they had to borrow trains from other railways to supplement the service. Yeah, it was incredibly popular right off the bat. In the first 12 months, it had 9.5 million passengers, and in the second 12 months, it's increased to 12 million passengers.
I feel like if this were a brand new idea and someone was like, for the first time ever, we've tunneled underground and we put a train, come ride it, I'd be like, I'll pass. I'm gonna see how this plays out for like 5 years, and then I'll join you.
Well, it wasn't so. This connected Paddington to King's Cross. So Paddington was where the Great Western Railway went all the way out to Bristol, Wales. That's the station we went out from. Oxford connects from Paddington. So the whole West Country, if you wanted to get from there going north, King's Cross will take you north, going all the way up into Scotland. Like, that's why in the Harry Potter series they leave from King's Cross Station, is because that traditionally served the north of England and Scotland. So originally you would get off the train at Paddington Station, you'd have to find a ride over to King's Cross Station on the road itself, then get back on the train there if you wanted to go further north, whereas this was able to cut out the street altogether. You wouldn't have to get stuck in traffic. So that's why it wasn't just novelty, it was also practicality.
Maybe I'm just stubborn. Still, I don't know.
So it kept on increasing. By 1884, there was over 800 trains on what they called the Inner Line then, which is now called the Circle Line. Just to give you an idea of how busy this was. And also, these were steam trains because it hadn't been electrified yet.
Jeez. So just a whole bunch of soot down there.
Yeah. The Metropolitan Railway's success was so large at first that they started another railway. This was called the Metropolitan District Railway, which is now the District Line in the underground. But it was a different company altogether that built its own railway. So due to high construction costs and conflicts with the Metropolitan Railway, they struggled to work together to build an efficient network. However, by 1781, the district was operating its own trains, and between these two major companies at first, they built a lot of the early underground network. Nowadays, the trains just get used for passengers. However, when it was first opened, a lot of times they would use these trains to move goods from station to station. So if you can imagine the train line also getting used for freight. When they built new stations at the time, most of the time they would have depots for coal and goods. Later in the 19th century, they built deeper, smaller tunnels, especially when they were going under the River Thames. And these smaller circular tunnels was where it got the name the Tube from. And to this day, they still have two styles of rolling stock for the system. They've got the smaller, deeper level trains, and then they've got the larger trains that mostly travel just under street level. Eventually, the system was electrified. The tube trains were the first ones to be electrified at the end of the 19th century. The Metropolitan Railway, the railway that ran just below street level, wasn't electrified until the first part of the 20th century. And today, the system was combined and is operated. And in the 20th century, the system was combined, and today it's operated under Transport for London, which also runs the overground system as well. I'd like to end with a tangent, because I came across this while researching.
I think feel like you start and end with tangents a lot.
Yeah, random tangent, and this came up while I was researching. It actually only came up right before that we were recording when you saw me open up the laptop after, and I was like, oh, I'm going to type something right quick.
Oh, okay, so this is a last minute.
Very last minute edition. When do you think the World Wide Web was invented?
The 90s?
Okay. Yeah, you're right. For some reason...
What did you think I was going to say?
I don't know.
When did you think it was invented?
Someone told me that the Department of Defense invented the World Wide Web, like, back in the day, but apparently that's not true.
What do you mean back in the day?
Like, back in the 80s. But apparently that's not true. Like,
Never heard that.
No. Apparently CERN invented the World Wide Web.
Who's CERN?
So CERN is the European Nuclear Research Program. It's in Switzerland.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a man. It was English man named Tim Berners-Lee in 1989.
Did he steal it from his neighbor?
Yeah, but apparently he wrote the first web browser.
He didn't. That was a joke.
Sorry, Tim.
I apologize, Tim. We appreciate your contributions. I'm very sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I don't know why. Someone told me that the U.S. military invented the World Wide Web, but apparently it was invented by CERN, or it was invented by this guy who was working for CERN, and he wrote the first web browser in 1990, which is in Geneva, Switzerland.
Who told you that?
I think I learned it in high school. I think I had a high school teacher who told me that.
Wow. Okay. That's concerning.
And it was one of those things I just accepted as true for a long time. Yeah, but so it was only used outside CERN in 1991 and then became available to the everyday public 1993, 1994.
Okay.
I guess that's
I feel
only
like...
interesting to me because that means the World Wide Web is like a decade younger than I thought. Because, yeah, this person told me up and down that the World Wide Web was invented by the U.S. military in the 80s and that they only opened it up to other countries in the 90s.
Did
but
you
apparently
not
it was CERN.
use the internet as a child?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was...
Because, like, that checks out. Like, I remember being, like, 5 years old and being super excited to check my AOL email. And it was always... only spam from the dentist.
Yeah, because...
but I was super, like, I was psyched about it as a kid, but it was, like, a whole, like, dial-up process, and then it was like, you've got mail.
Yeah, no, I remember, like, Netscape, and... Yeah, because Netscape was the first one that we had, so...
I've never heard the U.S. military invented it in the 80s thing. Never heard that.
All right.
Your teacher was either just... buying into some intense conspiracy theory or they're on to something. I don't know.
This teacher also, speaking of London, referred to the river as the Thames River.
Okay.
And refused to be corrected by students all year.
Great.
He was like, why would there be an H if they didn't want us to pronounce it? And everyone just kind of shook their heads.
Everyone with a silent letter in their name was just like, bruh.
You know, why don't we say Thomas instead of Thomas?
Hey, Thomas. Oof.
Yeah, I didn't want to continue all the way into the 20th century because I heard that yours took place during the 19th century, so that's why I cut mine off there.
Okay, so we're just staying somewhat grounded.
Keeping it in the Victorian time period.
house stories. So today I'm covering 50 Berkeley Square. 50 Berkeley Square is a 3-story home that faces onto Berkeley Park. It is around the corner from Buckingham Palace.
Okay.
So it's in a really, really beautiful spot. Walking past it, you would not know that it is reportedly one of the most haunted townhomes in London.
Okay.
According to legend, just touching the outside of it will cause you to feel like a jolt of spiritual energy. So according to one source, it was built in 1750. According to another source, it was built sometime in the 1800s.
Okay.
What we do know is that in 1859, a Thomas Myers moved into the home.
Okay.
And he was set to be married. He was very excited, so he bought the house for them to live in, and then he furnished it with the most lavish furniture and rugs and accessories to make it perfect for his new bride.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of days before the wedding,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of days before her and Thomas's wedding, allegedly she married someone else.
Oh my.
I don't know what the full story behind that is. I do not know what her name is, but
Oh no.
whoa,
Oh no.
the drama. Myers was absolutely devastated. So he kept the house in pristine. He kept it just how it was when he was rejected by her. So there were rugs and things that weren't fully put out. He just left it, and he moved into the attic of the home.
Okay.
And he, according to legend, he stayed there and did not see another living soul until he died in the early 1870s. And he slept all day and would only come out at night and wander the house by candlelight. Experts think that this is when kind of the hauntings started, or the reputation for it being a haunted house started.
Okay.
Because apparently crowds would come and stand across the street to try and see ghosts from inside the house.
Oh, okay.
Even though at this point I can't find a record of who might have been haunting the house.
Okay.
At this point it could very well be, neighborhood kids making up stories.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also rumors that at some point a little girl died in the home, and that she haunts the house. There is a story that a woman jumped from the attic window after suffering abuse at the hands of her uncle. Before Thomas Myers, we don't really know what was happening in this house.
Okay.
Fun side note, though, about Thomas Myers. So we know so much about him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Minerva is staring at me just wide-eyed. And she's sniffing so hard I can hear her.
She's grumpy cat.
She's so mad. All she wants to do is run up and down the apartment hallway.
Mm-hmm.
So we know so much about Thomas Myers because a neighbor, Dorothy Neville, wrote about him in her memoir that she published in 1906. So she's just spying on her neighbors and writing stories about them.
Is this person related to your aunt?
Maybe. Yes, my aunt loves to tell us what all her neighbors are doing. She keeps us very well updated. So she kept a record and wrote about Thomas Myers and what happened to him after his fiance married someone else. Which maybe she married someone else because he was a little weird.
It sounds like maybe he was subject to depressive episodes, because this is quite a reaction for someone deciding to marry someone else. So maybe he was already kind of a bit depressed and kind of a downer to begin with, and that might have been why she went with someone else.
Maybe, but also I feel like to marry someone else a couple days before you're scheduled to get married is such a specific act. almost like a last-ditch effort to get away from someone.
Yeah.
There's something very specific about it.
Yeah.
But...
yeah, this person could have been quite overbearing, maybe. I don't know. Allegedly. I wasn't there.
Yeah, I really... I don't know. It's just interesting. I don't know what the real drama is. It's actually kind of alluded to that Thomas Myers may have been the inspiration for Mrs. Havisham in Great Expectations.
Because...
Because Charles Dickens is known for basing characters off of real people, and when everyone tried to find out who Mrs. Havisham was, or Miss Havisham was based on, they were always looking for female figures.
So he just gender bent this one person. And that's actually the very first thing that I thought of when that you
Really?
mentioned, him staying in the house exactly as it had been before he didn't get married. And I didn't want to butt in just then. But.
Yeah, no, that is, it is rumored that he would have, Charles Dickens would have known, I believe that he would have known Dorothy Neville.
Okay.
And Dorothy Neville would have been like, I have to tell you all about my crazy neighbor.
Yeah.
Because she seems like that type of lady. So in this time, Myers is not taking care of the house, and it is falling into disrepair, which is not helping the haunted lore around the house and the stories that are getting passed around the neighborhood. After he dies, a father moves in with his 2 teenage daughters.
Okay.
And it seems like the only noticeable thing that happens is the daughters notice a foul smell in the house that they equate to zoo animals. In 1879, Mayfair magazine wrote a piece about an event that took place in the house.
Okay.
When the oldest daughter's fiance comes to stay, they send the maid up to the attic to make up the bed for him.
Okay.
And while she's up there, they hear her screaming. So they run up to try and help her, and they find her like crouched on the floor, just repeating, "Don't let it touch me, don't let it touch me, don't let it touch me." And she doesn't say anything else. She's actually taken away to an asylum, and allegedly she, according to the Mayfair magazine, she died there the next day.
Oh, wow.
So this is where the idea of an entity living in the attic that can scare you to death starts. The entity is often described as a brown mist or monster. The Mayfair magazine also mentions that the fiancé then still slept in the attic, either because I don't know, he slept in the attic. He thought that was a good idea. But shortly after the family went to bed, they heard him screaming.
Oh. And
they also found him dead on the floor.
Oh.
So now we've had 2 deaths in the house. 2 people who appear to be frightened to death in the home within a 24-hour period.
Oh.
This is when Lord Littleton decides to stay in the attic on a bet.
When was this?
There's several different versions of the story.
Okay.
The way I saw it most often, it was after the maid and the fiancé died.
Okay.
Other versions tell it differently.
Okay.
This is one that's been told and retold to a point that, it gets murky. On a bet, Lord Littleton stayed a night in the attic. He told the family that he had a bell with him. If they heard it ring once, then that was just him trying to comfort himself. If they heard it ring twice, he needed help.
Okay.
So again, shortly after the family went to bed, they heard the bell just ringing nonstop.
Okay.
And then they heard shotgun blasts.
Oh.
So, this is where the story splits off. In some versions, they find Lord Littleton dead, frightened to death.
Okay.
In some versions, he survives, and he claims to have shot at a mist, but they only find the cartridges the next day.
And this keeps happening in the attic.
In the attic.
Okay.
which is where Thomas Myers holed up.
Okay.
And also allegedly where a woman jumped to her death. And also allegedly where a little girl died.
Okay. I have an idea in my head.
Okay.
I'll wait till the end.
So the next little part of this story is kind of what brought this to my attention years ago, and I could not remember the name of this house to save my life. In 1887, 2 sailors from the HMS Penelope needed a place to stay.
Oh, that's the HMS Penelope. No, I'm just messing with you.
Don't do that to me.
I'm so sorry.
How dare you?
The HMS Penelope.
Penelope. I believed you too. I was like, oh no, I'm so dumb. You said it with such confidence.
I'm sorry.
I'm so mad at you.
I'm sorry.
I do not accept.
Oh dear.
In 1887, 2 sailors from the HMS Penelope so they needed a place to stay for the night.
Okay.
So they thought it would be an awesome idea to break into this house.
Oh.
And they stayed in none other than the attic.
Was the house unoccupied when they did this?
I hope so.
Or did they just like...
I really hope
Or
so.
did they just force an entrance while people were still living there and be like, it's all right, we're in the Navy?
There's so many just like little vignettes and missing pieces of this story that I don't know because it never mentions the father and daughters moving out, you know, after like 2 to 3 people died in their house. I'm assuming at this point they had moved out, but they just don't get mentioned again. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know what their names are. So they settle into sleep in the attic, and they are awoken to the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. So they get up and brace themselves for someone coming in. And then the door creaks open, and just this brown, misty mass. Some accounts say it had like a gaping mouth. Starts coming in through the door. So they panic and they run past it out of the house.
Okay.
However, one of them trips on the stairs and dies.
Ew.
In other versions of the stories, one runs down the stairs and the other jumps out the window and gets impaled on the fence below.
Ew.
So all bad. So the survivor comes back the next day with the police, which must be really awkward to be like, hey, I was in this house. Now my friend is dead after we broke in. It's very sketchy. In 1907, author Charles Harper wrote about 50 Berkeley Square in his book Haunted Houses, which kind of kept the whole story alive, even though nothing really significant had happened in a few decades.
Okay.
But it kept the lore alive. The property was purchased in the late 1930s by Maggs Brothers booksellers. I believe they still own it to this day.
So it's a haunted bookstore now?
It's now a haunted bookstore, yes.
That's cool.
Allegedly.
That's cool.
The Maggs want nothing to do with the haunting. They will swear up and down it is not haunted.
That sounds like a really good marketing.
Ed Maggs assures us these stories about the ghost are complete Horlicks. Nothing to it at all.
All right, well, all right.
Horlicks. Supposedly, a woman working for the booksellers in 2001 saw a brown mass of mist move quickly across the room and then disappear. Also in 2001, one of the cleaning staff said that she felt a presence of someone standing behind her, but when she would turn around, there would be no one there.
Okay.
Another time, a man walking up the staircase had his glasses snatched away from him and thrown on the floor.
Rude.
It's so deliberate.
That's kind of petty too. Like
He just stole his glasses.
that's petty.
But again, the owners will say over and over again, there's nothing in the house. It's not haunted.
Okay.
This is just... This one's really interesting to me because it's one where there's so much information on it. And yet at the same time, there's not enough information. Like there's huge gaps in what happens and so many different versions that this one was actually a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
Because the things we know for sure are Thomas Myers lived in the house and someone named Dorothy lived down the street and spied on him.
So these stories about bad smells, seeing some kind of gaseous mass moving around.
I don't know of another story of seeing like a misty, amorphous figure. I don't know of a lot of those. But it's very unsettling.
Yeah, but I don't know. No, I can't think off the top of my head. But then also the fact that this happened in the attic makes me suspect that this building might not have been well ventilated, might not have had good air circulation. And the reason why that these hauntings might have stopped in the 20th century could have had something to do with the fact that they would have no longer been burning fuel in the fireplaces to keep the house warm. They might have moved over to electric heat, and this could potentially be attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning.
But would they all be seeing the same thing? And would it happen that fast? Because on like the 3 accounts of the deaths in the attic, they weren't up there that long.
I mean, it sounds like the one man was the maid that was cleaning. She would have been up there for a decent amount of time, right? Cleaning?
The stories that... The way I read it, she wasn't up there. Like, she was just going up to, like, make up the bed or something.
Okay. It sounded like she was, like, going up there to, like, prepare the room, set the room, and I thought that could have taken a minute. The one man slept in there overnight and was dead the next day.
No, those 2 deaths happened, like, in the middle of the night, right after everyone had gone to bed.
Yeah, everyone went to bed. But, I mean, it doesn't take over a day for carbon monoxide poisoning to kill you.
Okay. I just didn't know if it was, like, within 30 minutes or...
But that would also match with, like, losing brain function early on before that happens. I'd be willing to propose that this was carbon monoxide poisoning, that the gas was collecting in the attics because as they would have been burning fuel in the fireplaces, it would have gone up the chimneys. However, something might not have been venting properly above the house itself. The gas then could have been accumulating in the attic, causing people who spent any period of time in the attic to first lose, to first have brain impairments, and then if they slept the night there, die. And then that would explain why this stopped happening when the 20th century started, because they would have switched over to electric heat.
So you just came here to poke holes in my story?
No, it's just
It's fine. Aliens built the subway.
Ancient man could not have built the London Underground. They would have required extraterrestrial assistance.
I don't believe in the underground, okay? It's not real. This one's really interesting to me because I feel like a lot of the people who lived around the house in like the middle of the 19th century assigned ghost stories to it or saw something and then made up a story that fit with what they saw. And there's not records because they were told orally.
Yeah.
Or it was written down and not given great sourcing. Like in that article, the maid who died is not named.
Well, it sounds like you have a definite source from the time, which was the Mayfair record.
The Mayfair magazine.
The Mayfair
wrote about
magazine. That would have been a contemporary source. It's not a first-hand account.
Yeah.
But that's that's quite an accurate close to the time source. But yeah, some of the others, it sounds like, an urban myth.
Yeah, like a
gets told in
woman
the
who
city.
who jumped out of the window and people seeing Thomas Myers' ghost and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
These are all just like, oh, I heard that someone saw him, but there's no real like meaty story to grab onto about it. It's just interesting how those stories evolved in that area and got told, and how they're lost today because there wasn't a way to keep a good record of things like that, which is now is really interesting because we're seeing ghost stories and legends evolve online, where there's a very clear record of where they start, and people who have first-hand accounts get to dictate it. They can tell you their own story. Like there's TikTok accounts chronicling their own haunted houses. There was like the Dear David thread on Twitter. You can go back and see the genesis of Slender Man and the Rake. Like, it's really interesting, this story versus how stories evolve today. And I think that's what really struck me about researching this one.
The other thing I just thought is the two men that supposedly broke in, and then one of them died falling down the stairs, or maybe fell out a window. Like, that also sounds like that could be a little bit suspect. Did the police look into that?
I don't know. I didn't find like a full, like, there's no more information about it, so I don't know if it even really happened. But yeah, I think I first read this story like 10 years ago in college. I just read the part about the sailors and seeing the blobby mass and like one of them running away and dying. And my first thing was just like, this dude like pushed his friend down the stairs and then was just like, officer, I saw a ghost. Like that's what was my first thought when I read it years ago.
Okay, yeah, because I don't know, it's a bit suspect. You and your companion go break into a building. Why are you breaking into a building?
Yeah. So that one, with all of these, it's really hard to say what happened and what didn't happen. What are just stories that, someone's like, well, my uncle 15 years ago heard about this guy who knew someone who broke into this building. And now it's been so long, it's hard to really verify, especially with paranormal stories.
Mm-hmm. It's funny though, because it's in, what was at the time, I think it was, London was the largest city in the world at that time, and yet it's funny how that little mythologies still evolve, even in a place where you think like everything would be meticulously recorded.
Yeah, because some things are, we know up and down what happened, like with the evolution of the underground. But little things like this happening in this neighborhood with this peculiar neighbor who lives in his attic, and stories evolving around the street, we don't really know.
What neighborhood did you say this is in again? Or I guess it must be in Mayfair, because
yes, yeah, it's in Mayfair. It's like right around the corner from Buckingham Palace.
It's funny because at that time Mayfair was like a very prominent neighborhood.
Oh, so it would have been like really scandalous for this dude to...
this wasn't like the East End of London. Like, this was, it wasn't the poor part of London. Mayfair was...
This wasn't like the East End.
Well, I mean, East End...
I don't know. So yeah, I guess that would have been quite scandalous then, if you have this guy moving into a more uppity area. Yeah. And he's set to get married and then gets like pre-left at the altar before the wedding day. Yeah. And then he just moves into his attic and doesn't talk to anyone. I guess that would have been like a really big scandal. So I can see how stories would evolve around that. So that's interesting. The theory that I'm really latching onto about this, which is not paranormal at all, is that he is the basis for Mrs. Havisham.
I believe that.
That's what I'm really, really coming back to on this one.
I do believe that. The time matches the situation matches.
Yeah.
And yeah, it would make sense that Dickens could have just gender bent this one story.
Yeah. Which, thank you to Dorothy for being a nosy neighbor and chronicling the events, because we wouldn't have that part of the story if she hadn't been spying on everybody. We wouldn't even have that. So good on you, Dorothy.
This was fun and interesting. We got to do I got to hear a story from outside the U.S. from you.
Yeah.
So
I learned how little I know about London and neighborhoods in London. I feel like yours was scarier because I'm still thinking about the Toothy Man. I'm never going to forget the Toothy Man. I'm so upset.
Well, I saw that, and that's why I had to double check with you that wasn't one of your stories. So.
No, I'm not. I did not do the Toothy Man. That might have been scarier. Ugh, the Toothy Man. We're working on this. We have a hard time tangenting out of our stories and wrapping it up.
Actually,
last week you had a really good scab story for us to end on. What do you have for us this week?
I guess this time my random tangent to end on was the thing about the internet. But when I wrote out these notes, I thought I was going second, so I thought that would be an interesting tangent just to kind of end on.
Oh yeah, because I don't remember.
And
so
then the
internet has nothing to do with the underground, right?
No, it just popped up while I was researching.
Okay.
It was.
I was like, how did we get here? And then I got so distracted by our conversation about the World Wide Web that I forgot to ask what it has to do with the underground.
So, if I remember right, because this was a few clicks down the rabbit hole, it was the London Underground schematic map led to schematic maps, led to someone had tried to create a schematic map of the internet.
Whoa. Okay.
Which led to the internet, and that's when I saw, oh, that was recent. That was actually a decade sooner than I thought. And my plan then for the internet had been to talk about how that people listening could find us online. That was how I really thought that I had the perfect ending this time. And then I started talking about it. And then I was like, wait, how do I transition this internet thing into yours?
Oh, no.
Yes, and I was going to be like, speaking of the internet, you can find us at Spooky Story Podcast. That's SPOOKISTORY Podcast. That's Gmail. Wait, you know them, not me.
Please email us at spookystorypodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at Spooky Story Podcast.
Mm-hmm. This was episode 7. We have footage from these recordings, video footage.
We will be on YouTube.
And we are in the process of getting that edited along with pictures and visuals. So anyone who's listening could also then follow along and see the things that we are talking about as that we reference them.
Things like the Toothy Man.
Yes, which I don't know if there's any pictures of that online.
Oh, God, I hope not.
So, yeah.
It's been
I think this one, it's we took a couple breaks, but I'm looking at our timestamp right now, and I think that this one's going to be one of our ones that we will finally, fingers crossed, I will have been able to get condensed down to 59 minutes. I want this one to be under an hour. We'll find out, I guess, once I get the edit done.
I mean, we'll know by now. We'll know by the time you're hearing this.
Yes.
If it's under an hour.
Yes. That's my goal, at least. I'm trying to condense things down into more manageable, listenable segments, because I know our first few ones we did were heavy subject matters and they drug on for some time. Oof. Speaking of subjects, do you want to spoil next week's subject?
I still don't know what the theme, like the tying together theme is. I just don't know what we're calling it.
Okay. Then, in that case, it'll be a mystery. You'll have to stick around and find out. Until that time comes, thanks for listening.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Please email us with any stories, feedback, pet pictures. Tell us about your day. Anything, really. Anything's good.
Tell us that ship was in fact called the HMS Penelope.
Tell us about your sighting of the Tiki Man.
I want like a good zinger to end.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll go now. We'll leave you alone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to bother you. I'll leave.
Thanks for listening. I'm Peter.
I'm Rena.
See you next time.
Bye.